Welcome to Echoes of the Unknown, the podcast where we explore the world's most fascinating unsolved mysteries. I'm James Carrington, and today we're traveling to the town of Oakville, Washington, where an ordinary summer morning in 1994 gave way to one of the strangest unexplained events ever reported. During what residents believed was nothing more than a passing rain shower, something far more mysterious fell from the sky. Within days, people and animals reportedly fell ill. Scientists collected samples, and speculation spread far beyond the rural community. Oakville is the kind of place many travelers pass without a second glance. Nestled in southwestern Washington between Olympia and the Pacific coast, the community has long been surrounded by forests, farmland, and quiet country roads. With only a few hundred residents, it's a place where neighbors know one another, unusual events become the talk of the town, and life generally moves at a slower pace than in the nearby cities. In August of 1994, nothing suggested that Oakville was about to become the center of an international mystery. On the morning of August 7th, the skies above Oakville were gray and overcast. Light rain drifted across the countryside, hardly unusual for western Washington. Residents went about their normal routines, driving to work, opening local businesses, or simply preparing for another quiet Sunday. Then something unusual began falling from the sky, a strange, gelatinous substance unlike anything they had ever seen. People noticed thousands of tiny, translucent blobs, each about half the size of a grain of rice, scattered across windshields, rooftops, sidewalks, and grassy fields. Some described them as looking like tiny pieces of clear gelatin. Others compared them to partially melted hail or soft jelly. They were colorless, slippery to the touch, and seemed to dissolve after sitting in the open air for a time. At first, most people paid little attention. Strange things occasionally wash ashore or fall from the sky, and the blobs seemed more curious than threatening. But as the morning continued, more and more residents reported seeing the same mysterious substance covering the town. The material wasn't confined to a single yard or neighborhood. It appeared over a wide area, suggesting that whatever had happened had affected much of the community. Among those who encountered the strange material was local police officer David Lacey. While on patrol, he observed the blobs covering portions of the roadway and nearby fields. Curious, he examined the substance himself. Like many residents, he couldn't identify it. It didn't resemble anything he had seen before, and no obvious explanation presented itself. The mystery might have ended there as nothing more than an odd weather event. Instead, it became far stranger. Within days, several residents reported developing flu-like symptoms. They described nausea, dizziness, fatigue, headaches, and respiratory problems. Some believed their illnesses began shortly after coming into contact with the gelatinous material. Others wondered whether the timing was merely an unfortunate coincidence. Before long, stories began circulating that pets had also become sick after touching or consuming the substance, although many of those reports proved difficult to verify independently. What made the phenomenon even more unsettling was that it wasn't an isolated event. Over the next 3 weeks, residents reported the mysterious blobs falling from the sky 5 more times, bringing the total to 6 separate incidents. Each new report brought renewed speculation. What exactly was falling from the sky? Why did it seem to appear only over this small rural community? And if the substance was harmless, why did so many people believe it was making them sick? Word of the phenomenon soon spread beyond Oakville. Local newspapers picked up the story, followed by regional television stations. Before long, scientists, journalists, and investigators interested in unexplained phenomena all found themselves asking the same questions. What was this mysterious substance? Where had it come from? And why had it fallen over Oakville? The answers, it seemed, would prove far more elusive than anyone imagined. Some local residents began collecting samples of the mysterious gelatinous material before it could dissolve. They carefully scooped the blobs into plastic containers or glass jars, hoping that laboratory testing would finally reveal what had fallen from the sky. Instead, the analyses produced conflicting results that only fueled further speculation. According to multiple retellings of the incident, a local health official initially reported that the gelatinous material contained human white blood cells, a finding that received widespread publicity and contributed to concerns that it might be some kind of biological substance. However, later laboratory analysis challenged that conclusion after determining the samples lacked cell nuclei, meaning they could not have been intact human white blood cells. Scientists did identify two common environmental bacteria, but those findings did little to explain the blobs themselves. Their presence could indicate environmental contamination or that the material provided a habitat for bacteria after it landed. Complicating matters further, the original samples were reportedly no longer available for additional testing, with some sources saying they were lost or discarded. That left one of the incident's most important pieces of evidence beyond further scientific examination. No official laboratory report confirming those findings has ever been publicly released, and much of what is known today comes from interviews and secondhand accounts rather than surviving scientific documentation. That lack of documentation has become one of the greatest frustrations surrounding the Oakville blobs. Researchers generally agree that samples were examined, but exactly what those tests revealed, and whether later retesting confirmed the results, remains uncertain. Over the years, the story has been repeated so many times that separating established fact from local legend has become increasingly difficult. As investigators searched for answers, a number of explanations began to emerge. One of the earliest theories focused on nearby military operations. At the time, the U.S. Army was conducting training exercises in parts of Washington state, and some residents wondered whether the blobs might have been connected to military aircraft. Rumors spread that the substance had been accidentally released during classified exercises, or that it represented the byproduct of an experimental technology. No evidence has ever surfaced to support those claims, and the U.S. military has consistently denied any involvement. Another possible explanation is a naturally occurring substance known as star jelly. For centuries, people have reported finding mysterious, translucent masses of gelatinous material on grass, tree branches, and fields, often after rainstorms. Folklore claimed the strange substance fell from the sky, but scientists have proposed several far more ordinary explanations. In many cases, star jelly appears to be the regurgitated egg masses or internal tissues of frogs and toads left behind by predators such as owls or herons. Others have identified it as colonies of cyanobacteria known as nostoc, which remain dormant during dry weather before swelling into rubbery, jelly-like masses after a heavy rain. Star jelly is known for appearing suddenly and then drying out or disappearing within a short time, making it difficult to study before it vanishes. However, while intriguing, none of those explanations fully account for the large quantity of material reportedly observed across Oakville, or for the repeated reports over a period of 3 weeks. As for the illnesses reported by residents, some researchers proposed a far more ordinary explanation. They suggested that the illnesses may simply have coincided with an outbreak of influenza or another seasonal virus. After all, flu-like symptoms such as nausea, fatigue, headaches, and respiratory problems are common and can spread quickly through a community. If people had already been discussing the mysterious blobs, it would have been natural to associate any subsequent illness with the strange substance, even if the two events were unrelated. Yet supporters of the Oakville mystery point out that several witnesses insisted the timing was simply too precise to dismiss as coincidence. They argued that people began experiencing symptoms only after direct contact with the gelatinous material, and that similar reports came from multiple households. Although those accounts are impossible to verify completely today, they remain one of the reasons the case continues to attract attention decades later. Journalists from local newspapers and television stations interviewed residents throughout the summer, and before long, the story spread across the country. UFO researchers, paranormal investigators, and curious skeptics all arrived in Oakville searching for evidence. Some hoped to collect fresh samples if the blobs returned. Others simply wanted to determine whether the stories had grown more dramatic with each retelling. Unfortunately, every investigation encountered the same obstacle. There simply wasn't enough reliable evidence. Many of the original samples had disappeared or deteriorated. Contemporary news reports were often brief and lacked scientific detail. Witness recollections naturally changed over time, and many of the most sensational claims could not be independently verified. With each passing year, the line between documented fact and community folklore became increasingly difficult to distinguish. Instead of bringing clarity, every new investigation seemed to deepen the mystery. Whatever had fallen over Oakville, it had left behind more questions than answers. As the years passed, the Oakville Blobs became one of those rare mysteries that seemed to grow more complicated rather than less. Every new article, documentary, or online discussion introduced fresh claims, challenged old ones, or repeated details that were increasingly difficult to verify. What had begun as a local curiosity slowly evolved into an international mystery. But with each retelling, separating documented fact from speculation became more challenging. Certain aspects of the story are reasonably well established. Numerous residents reported witnessing an unusual, gelatinous substance falling from the sky during August 1994. Contemporary newspaper articles documented the event. Local television stations interviewed witnesses, and law enforcement officers acknowledged that they had observed the mysterious material. Beyond those basic facts, however, the certainty begins to fade. For those inclined toward more extraordinary explanations of the blobs, the mystery has naturally invited speculation about unidentified aerial phenomena or other unknown sources. Supporters of these theories argue that the repeated falls, the unusual appearance of the material, and the reported illnesses suggest something beyond conventional science. Skeptics counter that extraordinary conclusions require compelling physical evidence, and in this case, that evidence simply does not exist. Without preserved samples, verified laboratory reports, or a known source, the more extraordinary theories remain just that, theories. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the Oakville Blobs is how easily an unexplained event can evolve into modern folklore. Every retelling adds another detail, another witness, or another theory. Some of those additions may reflect genuine memories that surfaced later. Others may simply be the natural result of a story growing more elaborate as it passes from one generation to the next. Distinguishing between those possibilities has become one of the greatest challenges facing anyone who studies the case today. More than 30 years later, investigators still cannot answer the simplest question of all. What, exactly, fell over Oakville in the summer of 1994? Despite decades of investigation, scientific uncertainty, and countless competing theories, the most honest answer remains the same as it was on the day the first mysterious blobs drifted down from the Washington sky. Nobody knows for sure. The mystery has endured precisely because that simple answer has never changed. The blobs themselves disappeared almost as quickly as they had arrived. Samples deteriorated, memories gradually faded, and many of the people who witnessed the strange event moved on with their lives. Yet the questions raised during those August mornings have continued to captivate scientists, investigators, and curious observers alike. Every new generation that encounters the story asks the same question the residents of Oakville asked in 1994. What was it that fell from the sky? Unlike many famous mysteries, the Oakville Blobs never produced a single dramatic breakthrough. There was no hidden government document, no definitive laboratory report, and no long-awaited confession that finally explained what had happened. Instead, the case slowly evolved into one of those rare modern mysteries that survives precisely because it resists easy explanation. Every proposed theory appears to answer some questions while leaving others unresolved. For scientists, the Oakville blobs illustrate how difficult it can be to investigate an unusual event when physical evidence is limited and documentation is incomplete. Without preserved samples that can be examined using modern techniques, researchers are left relying on newspaper accounts, witness interviews, and memories recorded years after the fact. Those sources provide valuable clues, but they also leave room for uncertainty. As time passes, distinguishing between established facts and stories that have grown through repeated retelling becomes increasingly challenging. For believers in the unexplained, however, the mystery remains deeply compelling. They point to the repeated reports of gelatinous material falling from the sky, the accounts of illness that followed, and the inability of investigators to reach a definitive conclusion. To them, Oakville represents one more example of an event that conventional explanations have never fully resolved. Skeptics see the case differently, arguing that incomplete evidence makes extraordinary conclusions impossible to support. In their view, the Oakville blobs are best understood as an unusual local event that gradually became surrounded by folklore and speculation. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between those two perspectives. It's entirely possible that a natural phenomenon occurred, but that its unusual appearance inspired stories that became more elaborate over time. It's equally possible that some important piece of evidence was lost before investigators had the opportunity to study it thoroughly. The reality is that we simply don't know. That uncertainty has allowed the mystery to endure long after the physical evidence itself disappeared. Today, the Oakville blobs continue to appear in books, documentaries, podcasts, and online discussions devoted to unexplained phenomena. New generations encounter the story and ask the very same questions residents asked in 1994. What exactly fell from the sky? Why did it happen in Oakville? Were the reported illnesses connected to the strange substance, or was the timing merely coincidental? Despite decades of curiosity, no answer has achieved broad scientific acceptance. Whatever it was that drifted down over Oakville that summer, it left behind something far more enduring than large amounts of a mysterious gelatinous material. It left behind a story, one that continues to challenge investigators, spark debate, and remind us that even in an age of satellites, smartphones, and sophisticated science, there are still moments when nature, coincidence, and mystery intersect in ways we can't fully explain. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Echoes of the Unknown. If you found this story compelling, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with fellow mystery lovers. Your support helps us continue exploring the world's most fascinating unsolved mysteries, one story at a time. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't the ones hidden in distant places. They're the ones that fall quietly into our own backyard.